Ethical lapses are errors in judgment that violate ethical principles. These lapses have harmful outcomes. Their proliferation represents a massive challenge that affects organizations, industries, and institutions. However, while there are enough ethical lapses out there to create a library, most leaders don't compromise their morals, ethics, or decision making, posing the questions: what is different, and why are some more prone to fail than others? Are these individuals predisposed? Is there an internal cause that is responsible? Or is it a product of the environment or the culture of the organization? Or a combination of all of them? This case study focuses on lapses that are sexual in nature and dives headfirst into the dynamics underlying this epidemic, exploring the nexus between leadership, power, environment, and the organization. Examining data, military doctrine, leadership theory, ethics, and group dynamics to shed some light on the systemic factors that might play a hand on the ethical erosion of the military. The goal of this study is to serve as a catalyst for change and as a resource for organizations and leaders. Understanding how the Army is structured is necessary in order to understand the specific dynamics and forces at play during the rest of the case. The Army is comprised of two primary groups: officers and enlisted soldiers. Both groups work closely together, but their duties, responsibilities, and benefits are vastly different. Enlisted soldiers are usually 18-year-old high school graduates and begin their career as privates for a year or two before they're promoted to specialist. Private, private first class, and specialist make up the junior enlisted ranks and most of the soldiers in any given formation. Corporal, sergeant, and staff sergeant serve as the non-commissioned officers of the enlisted group, whereas sergeant first class, first sergeant, and command sergeant major serve as the senior enlisted ranks. A sergeant is usually responsible for a team of 4 soldiers. They fall under a squad comprised of 3 teams led by a staff sergeant. A brand new second lieutenant is usually a 24-year-old college graduate. It should be highlighted that the lowest officer rank outranks the highest enlisted soldier. A lieutenant will usually serve as a platoon leader, leading a platoon comprised of 4 squads or around 30 soldiers. They lead this platoon alongside an enlisted soldier, usually in the rank of sergeant first class, the 7th highest enlisted rank, with around 8 to 16 years of experience. After 5 years in service, the lieutenant will promote to captain and eventually serve as a company commander. The commander is responsible for a company, usually comprised of 4 platoons or around 120 soldiers, working alongside a first sergeant, which is the 8th highest enlisted rank with around 14 to 20 years of experience. Officers won't command again until around 12 to 14 years later, when they become lieutenant colonels, the 5th highest officer rank, and serve as battalion commanders. They work alongside a command sergeant major, which is the highest rank an enlisted soldier can attain. The battalion is comprised of 4 companies, totaling roughly 400 to 600 soldiers. Out of all the lieutenants that join the Army each year, roughly only 1 in 8 will remain in the Army 20 years later and be selected for battalion command. Only half of those will then promote to colonel and be responsible for a brigade of thousands, and out of those, only but a handful promote to general and lead divisions, corps, or commands of tens and hundreds of thousands. The Army is a highly structured and hierarchical organization. A sergeant leads a team, follows orders from his staff sergeant, squad leader, which in turn follows orders from either his platoon leader, lieutenant, or platoon sergeant, sergeant first class, then commander or first sergeant, and so on and so forth. In short, most military organizations have a group of enlisted soldiers that is led by an officer. When in command, this officer becomes a commander, and they are responsible for everything their unit does or fails to do. While they can delegate authority, they cannot delegate responsibility. This study operates under the fundamental assumption that individuals, including those in positions of authority within the military and army organizations, generally aspire to act in accordance with ethical principles and moral values. In undertaking this study, it is imperative to underscore that the analysis is conducted with the utmost respect for the invaluable contributions and sacrifices of military personnel and acknowledges the ethical complexities inherent in their roles and responsibilities. This study endeavors to contribute to the advancement of ethical leadership practices and the promotion of organizational excellence within the military. While this case study might appear anti-military, anti-officer, and anti-commander at times, it is not the goal of the study to do or be so. By examining this epidemic through a multidimensional lens, the study seeks to achieve the following objectives: understand complex dynamics including psychological and organizational influences, promote ethical leadership within organizations, emphasizing the cultivation of a culture of integrity, accountability, and ethical decision-making, and to stimulate critical reflection and discourse, encouraging proactive measures to address systemic vulnerabilities and mitigate the risk of ethical lapses. A major source of inspiration for this case study is the Lucifer effect, Understanding How Good People Turn Evil by Philip Zimbardo. The book explores human behavior and the factors that contribute to heinous crimes. Zimbardo delves into the transformation of ordinary individuals into perpetrators of atrocities. The book provides a detailed account of the Stanford prison experiment, where Zimbardo simulated a prison environment and observed how quickly the average and normal college student assumed roles of guards and prisoners, leading to disturbing displays of power abuse. Further, Zimbardo compares his own experiment with the Milgram obedience experiment, where individuals administer shocks of increasing voltage to other individuals, highlighting the role of power, obedience, and conformity. Research for this case study was mainly performed via unobtrusive methods, by retrieving information and documents via open source, such as news articles, FOIA documents, RAND studies, AMI regulations and publications, and academic books and papers. In addition, a collection of 30 Army Command climate surveys was compiled and analyzed to help triangulate and validate information. Ultimately, due to the nature of the topics discussed at hand, this case study leans more on the qualitative side of the data rather than the quantitative side. Data was gathered in the form of Defense Equal Opportunity Command Surveys, also known as Command Climate Surveys, which are mandatory surveys that all commanders must take within 60 days of assuming command, and every year thereafter. In total, around 1,500 soldiers from 30 different units responded to the survey over a period of 14 months. This set of variables are considered positive. The higher the number, the better. Numbers below the average, which is represented at the bottom, are shown in red, whereas numbers above average are represented in green. Transformational leadership measures the perception over the past 3 months that leaders encourage, inspire, and motivate others to meet new challenges and accomplish tasks beyond what they felt was possible. Transformational leadership for senior leaders measures the perception that leaders encourage, inspire, and motivate others to meet new challenges and accomplish tasks beyond what they felt was possible. Supportive leadership is the perception that leaders build trust, encourage goal attainment and professional development, promote effective communication, and support teamwork. High morale is the confidence, enthusiasm, collective pride, and willingness to persist in the activities of the group. Work-life balance measures one's perception that the demands of their work and personal life are compatible. Fair treatment is the perception that formal and informal organizational policies, practices, and procedures regarding information sharing, job opportunities, and promotions are based on merit, inclusion, equality, and respect. Engaged and committed measures the extent to which one finds their work fulfilling and is committed to their job and organization. Cohesive organization assesses whether individuals in a workplace care about each other, share the same mission and goals, and work together effectively. Inclusive organization indicates whether individuals are treated fairly and respectfully, have equal access to opportunities and resources, and can contribute fully to the organization's success. High connectedness measures perceptions of closeness to a group and satisfaction with one's relationship to others in the group. This set of variables are considered negative. The lower the number, the better. Numbers above average are shown in red, whereas numbers below average are represented in green. Passive leadership, for both the commander and the senior enlisted, is the perception that leaders avoid decisions, do not respond to problems, fail to follow up, hesitate to act, and are absent when needed. Sexually harassing and racially harassing behaviors measures the presence of said behaviors in the organization. Toxic leadership, for senior enlisted leaders and supervisors, now referred to as counterproductive leadership, is the perception that leaders disregard subordinate input, defy logic or predictability, and have self-promoting tendencies. Moderate high stress measures the levels of stress experienced by individuals in the organization. Sexist behaviors measure behaviors that include verbal and nonverbal behaviors that convey insulting, offensive, or condescending attitudes based on perceived gender of the individual. Binge drinking measures how often one consumes 4 or more drinks. Frequent alcohol memory loss measures how often one was unable to remember what happened the night before due to drinking alcohol. Correlations between different variables identify potential relationships. Positive correlations between transformational leadership ratings and good indicators suggest that higher levels of transformational leadership are associated with positive organizational culture, whereas negative correlations between passive leadership ratings and these indicators suggest the opposite. It is important to note that correlation does not imply causation, and further investigation will be required to make those claims. While higher ratings of transformational leadership may correlate with higher morale or engagement, it doesn't necessarily mean that transformational leadership directly causes these outcomes, and other factors could be at play, such as culture. Positive leadership behaviors, such as being supportive, fair, and engaging, can contribute to a positive organizational culture characterized by high morale, cohesion, and commitment. Conversely, negative leadership behaviors, such as passivity or toxicity, can undermine organizational culture and lead to lower morale, engagement, and cohesion. The data shows that there is a direct correlation between transformational leadership between the commander and their enlisted counterpart. Secondly, the more transformational the leader is, the less likely they are to be passive. However, it was found that there is no correlation between the transformational leader, a combination of both the commander and their counterpart, and sexually harassing behaviors. The biggest correlation between leaders' behaviors and sexually harassing behaviors was toxic leadership, which is now referred to as counterproductive leadership. Further, the data shows that sexually harassing behaviors were found to correlate with both sexist behaviors, toxic leadership, and racially harassing behaviors. Lastly, sexually harassing behaviors were found to correlate with high morale and high connectedness, and albeit the leader didn't correlate organically with sexually harassing behaviors, the combination of both the commander and the senior enlisted leaders' transformational leadership correlate with high morale. Two main RAND studies were examined: organizational characteristics associated with risk of sexual assault and sexual harassment in the United States Army by Miriam Matthews et al., and risk factors for sexual assault and sexual harassment in the United States military by Terry Schell et al. The first study compiles the total risk of sexual harassment and sexual abuse at different installations, finding that Fort Hood, Fort Bliss, Fort Riley, Fort Campbell, and Fort Carson have the 5 highest totals. Further, United States Forces Command and United States Army Special Operations Command show the highest adjusted sexual harassment risks. The Pentagon, Fort Belvoir, and Walter Reed have the lowest totals, whereas Fort Gordon, Fort Meade, and Fort Wainwright have the lowest adjusted risks. A little more background about the Army is needed to highlight why this is important. The military has multiple branches. You have combat armed branches such as the infantry and artillery, whose sole purpose is to train for, fight, and win America's wars. And you have support branches such as medical command that have a mission during peace and during war, taking care of injured and sick soldiers. While the potential for these individuals to go to war exists, it is usually in a less direct capacity than that of combat armed units. Forces Command, or FORSCOM, is full of combat armed units and has a good size of the population in the aforementioned forts. When combined with Special Operations Command, they make up the majority of soldiers that engage in armed conflict. Other commands, such as Training and Doctrine Command or TRADOC, will rarely, if ever, see combat, as their mission is to turn civilians into quality soldiers for the Army. TRADOC is mainly responsible for initial entry training, such as basic training or boot camp. The composition, culture, and makeup of the organization varies tremendously from unit to unit, but even more so from command to command and branch to branch. The study found the following characteristics associated with higher risks: high operational tempo, joining as an enlisted soldier, and serving in combat specialties. On the other hand, the study also found that good unit climate, good supervisor climate, higher proportion of females, higher proportion of civilians, and certain job specialties such as nurse, health services, public affairs, finance, legal, and human resources are associated with lower risks. The second study sampled 560,000 service members, finding that younger age, lower educational attainment, being single, enlisting, lower pay grade, and joining any branch other than the Air Force are associated with higher risks of sexual harassment. It should be highlighted that the Navy and the Marine Corps both have a higher risk than the Army. Multiple factors are at hand, such as time spent underway in a ship, that had also been found to correlate with higher risk of sexual harassment. But a possible explanation entails the difference between the humiliation processes in different branches of service, which will be discussed in depth later during the video. The Army defines leadership as the activity of influencing people by providing purpose, direction, and motivation to accomplish the mission and improve the organization. A leader is anyone who, by virtue of assigned role or responsibility, provides purpose, direction, or motivation. While current Army doctrine doesn't recommend any specific leadership theories or styles, and further recommends leaders to adapt their style to the situation at hand, there are 4 main leadership styles that are currently associated with military leadership. Transformational leadership, which is heavily implied as the go-to model by the Defense Equal Opportunity Command Survey, as well as competent leadership, the first 100 days, emphasizing influencing, building, and utilizing relationships. Servant leadership is heavily implied by multiple publications, including People First Task Force, a byproduct of systemic failures of leadership in many installations, as well as leadership courses in the past decade. Transactional and autocratic leadership are a byproduct of the culture, policies, and the structure of the military. Transformational leadership inspires followers by motivating them towards a shared vision, fostering commitment and loyalty. It encourages ethical behavior and the development of future leaders through investment in supporting its growth. However, dependency on the leader and idealization can lead to ethical lapses if the leader's judgment is flawed or if charisma is used for manipulation. Some of the characteristics of charismatic leaders include being dominant, desire to influence others, being self-confident, and having a strong sense of moral values. The full range model of leadership shows the idealization of transformational leadership, behind the four transformational I's: idealized influence, inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, and individualized consideration. A study found that people who exhibited transformational leadership were perceived to be more effective leaders with better outcomes. Further, another study found that transformational leadership augmented the impact of transactional behaviors. However, many issues arise with the utilization of both transformational leadership and the leaders that display it. While Nordhaus utilizes a different leadership model to describe the transformational style of Hitler and other individuals with a skewed sense of morality, they are ultimately examples of transformational leadership and should serve as a reminder of the negative effects of these leaders can cause. Transactional leaders don't individualize their followers' needs. They exchange something of value for effort. This process is called contingent reward and is only influential when the follower is interested in what the leader can provide. Transactional leadership has two other dimensions: passive and active management by exception. Leaders that display active transactional leadership watches followers, anticipates mistakes, and then makes a corrective action. A passive transactional leader only intervenes when a goal hasn't been met. Transactional leadership is rooted in the utilization of positive and negative reinforcement. The military creates a perfect breeding ground for transactional leadership, as the main tools at their disposal for rewards are medals and evaluations, both of which play a big role in promotions and in turn salary and standing. While it can be effective for short-term goals, it doesn't reward personal initiative and limits creativity. Servant leadership prioritizes serving others. It emphasizes to be attentive to the needs of their followers and putting them first. However, this dogma is contrary to the military's own value of selfless service. Servant leaders may jeopardize the organization for the individual. Despite its strengths, it may be perceived as weak due to the lack of assertiveness, and the time-consuming nature of building relationships may detract from other responsibilities. Vulnerability to exploitation is another concern, where leaders may be taken advantage for personal gain. This model of leadership makes any form of organizational change difficult to implement, and research has found that servant leadership had no effects on extra-role performance nor work engagement. Autocratic leadership is characterized by total control, with little to no input from the group. It offers a clear chain of command, enabling quick and decisive decision-making while maintaining discipline and unity among soldiers. However, this style may suppress creativity and innovation, as subordinates may feel demoralized without input in decision-making. Moreover, there is a risk of abuse of power, where leaders prioritize the interests over ethical considerations, potentially leading to unethical behaviors. From a virtue theory perspective, authoritarian leaders may prioritize obedience and loyalty over individual autonomy, leading to negative virtues such as arrogance or cruelty when challenged. The military places extreme power on the commander, and ultimately all decisions are theirs to make. While their staff recommends and ensure the commander have the best picture for the situation at hand, they are not required to take the input into consideration. Ethical theories are frames that help individuals decide what is good and what is bad. There are four main ethical theories: consequentialism, in which actions are good if the consequences are good; regulationism dictates that an act is moral if it obeys a rule; deontology, which states that an action is good if it comes from duty; and lastly, virtue ethics, which take character-centered approach to morality, and it calls for all actions to obey the golden mean, in essence, calling for actions to be the mean between the extremes. Although transformational leadership has an ethical aspect, it tends to partake too much into the egotistical consequentialist. This is a subtype of consequentialism that focuses solely on how the outcome affects the individual. This is not necessarily a bad thing, as being selfish shouldn't be confused with being hedonist. As Edwin Locke mentions, an egotistic leader will choose a career they selfishly enjoy, and they might choose to hire those that disagree with them if they know it will bring them success in the long run. While servant leadership also has a moral dimension, it is important to highlight that the fact that helping others isn't necessarily self-sacrificial, as it can be done for selfish reasons. A leader might be given something in the short run for the expected value and greater return in the long term. While both transactional and autocratic leadership lack a moral dimension, transactional leadership can be considered neutral when it comes to morals and virtue theories. On the other hand, autocratic leadership can negatively affect the moral and virtuousness of the entire group. On July 11, 2013, the Army removed Brigadier General Brian Roberts over charges of adultery and involvement in a physical altercation. General Roberts had deployed to Iraq 3 times and had served the Army for 29 years. This is, unfortunately, far from an uncommon occurrence, especially when considering the number of individuals at that rank. On August 2019, the Army removed Major General Bradley Baker for having an inappropriate relationship prior to his divorce. The Army stripped Major General Joseph Harrington of rank and had forced him to retire for engaging in inappropriate communication with the spouse of a soldier under his command. An investigation by USA Today found that since 2013, the military had documented at least 500 cases of serious misconduct amongst generals and admirals in the military. Many of these cases were related to sex. This epidemic isn't restricted to the military, gender, rank, or leadership. Presidents such as Bill Clinton and Donald Trump have battled with stronger allegations of misconduct. Colonel Megan Sullivan was relieved after allegedly groping multiple subordinates, and Captain Billy Joe Crosby was convicted of assault after forcing his face between the breast of a subordinate during a promotion. Not only are leaders susceptible, although it is the focus of this case study, the same ethical erosion can be found in certain special operations communities. Army Special Forces have battled with murder and cocaine trafficking, while the Navy SEAL community has dealt with cover-ups, murder, trafficking, and alleged war crimes. An entire case study could be built on this subject as it calls for further examination. Major General Wayne Grigsby claimed that while not making any excuses, the increased operational tempo and the fact that he had deployed every other year since 9/11 contribute to the affair with his subordinate. Do deployments, stress, and environment play a hand on the situations, or as former Secretary of the Air Force pointed out, the military is a sector with a lot of power and authority, and that sometimes begets bad behavior. There are 6 bases of power: reward power based on promise of positive, desirable incentives; coercive power based on the threat of negative consequences; legitimate power, which is the given right to require the requested action; referent power, which is relationship based, such as respect; expert power, based on perceived knowledge, skills, and abilities; and lastly, informational power, which is based on the capacity to reason, explain, and inform. At its essence, power represents the ability to influence, shaping the course of events and determining outcomes. Power dynamics can profoundly impact lives and society. Moreover, power dynamics can be inherently unequal, with certain individuals or groups possessing greater access to resources, opportunities, and social capital than others. Dominance is defined as the exercise of power and control over others. In interpersonal relationships, dominance may manifest as coercive behavior, manipulation, or intimidation, undermining mutual respect and autonomy. Individuals who seek to dominate others may resort to tactics such as gaslighting, emotional abuse, or exerting physical force to assert control and maintain their perceived superiority. Moreover, the perpetuation of dominance within societal structures can exacerbate systemic inequalities and social injustice. Marginalized groups may face systemic barriers to accessing resources, opportunities, and representation, perpetuating cycles of poverty, discrimination, and disenfranchisement. 2 studies should be noted: the Milgram experiment and the Stanford Prison experiment. The Milgram experiment studied individuals' reactions to orders given by someone in a position of authority. In short, it tested obedience. The study consisted of individuals giving shocks of increasing voltage to another person after they had committed a mistake, eventually rising to a point where it would be fatal. The study found that 65% of such subjects administered the full 450 voltage discharge. In the Stanford prison experiment, students volunteered to play the role of guards and prisoners. During the first day, the individuals had fully committed to the character and began abusing the prisoners, making them do physical exercises and sexually humiliating them. The study also found that via the parole officer, a recently released felon, the prior prisoner status played no role in the empathy of the parole officer, and in fact hindered, to an extent, the release of the prisoners. In both studies, the prestige of the organization conducting the study played a role in the subjects of the experiment. They believed that both Yale and Stanford were prestigious organizations that knew better than them and had no reason to doubt them. The prison experiment highlighted an important aspect of power seeking. In some situations, the experience of power is very positive, energizing, and revitalizing. In this instance, individuals might become more preoccupied with seeking power. One guard confessed that after playing that role for a few days, he had finally gotten the will to commit adultery with his brother's wife. The Bathsheba syndrome, named after the biblical narrative of King David's affair with Bathsheba, refers to a phenomenon where individuals, usually men in positions of power, succumb to temptation and engage in unethical or immoral behavior. The study serves as a cautionary tale about corrupting influence of power and the dangers of unchecked desires. Despite his status as a king and servant of God, David's lust for Bathsheba led him to commit adultery, deceit, and ultimately murder, resulting in severe repercussions for himself and his kingdom. Individuals who succumb to Bathsheba syndrome may rationalize their actions, minimize the harm caused, or attempt to conceal their misconduct to preserve their reputation and maintain their grip on power. The creation of dehumanization in the military is often facilitated by the de-individuation of individuals within the hierarchical structure of the military organization. The dark triad consists of narcissism, which is characterized by grandiosity and a sense of entitlement, Machiavellianism, marked by manipulative and exploitative behavior, and psychopathy, defined by callousness and impulsivity. This dark triad can predispose individuals to engage in unethical behavior for personal gain or gratification. These traits may manifest in behaviors such as deceit, manipulation, and exploitation of others for one's benefit. Within military organizations, individuals exhibiting psychopathic behaviors or dark triad traits may pose challenges due to the hierarchical structure and emphasis on obedience, loyalty, and discipline. All three traits relate to leadership emergence. Machiavellians are chameleons that can manipulate a situation to their favor. Narcissists' confidence also leads them to leadership positions, while psychopathy is usually unable to attain leadership positions due to their lack of empathy and consciousness. This doesn't stop them from being successful in certain organizations. Traumatic brain injuries, or TBIs, are associated with poor judgment and social disinhibition. A case report concluded that brain dysfunction manifests after a TBI. In one patient, TBI led to voyeurism, which eventually will cause him to commit suicide due to his inability to control his behavior. Another patient that suffered a TBI will go on to abuse alcohol. Despite both individuals demonstrating sound moral judgment, they suffer irrational and uncontrollable impulses. A manuscript attributes executive functioning deficit, which includes judgment, impulsivity, and the emotional and cognitive aspects of decision making, to moderate to severe TBIs. The manuscript reveals that options associated with rewards are emphasized, whereas negative outcomes are suppressed. The effect of the TBI can be long-lasting, ranging from 6 months to years. The United States Armed Forces Health Monitoring Center reported that over 350,000 service members suffered a TBI from 2000 to 2016. Stress can also affect judgment. Stress influences neural circuits involved with rewards, modifying the individual propensity to partake in high-risk behaviors. The survey conducted for this case study found that 20% of individuals experienced moderate to high stress in the organization. Further, only 68% of individuals believed they had an adequate work-life balance. Post-traumatic stress disorder has been found to correlate with reward discounting. Reward discounting devalues larger but delayed rewards while prioritizing smaller but immediate rewards. According to the National Center for PTSD, 10% of all men, 90% of all women serving in the military were diagnosed with PTSD. The Army's messaging regarding desired leadership styles isn't very clear. While in some publications it directs leaders to be adaptive, other publications and artifacts suggest the opposite and delineate a desired leadership style. Transformational leadership, for example, can lead to issues where the leaders focus more on being well liked than enforcing standards. Thus, military leaders are placed at a disadvantage, leading individuals that are primed and institutionalized to receive and follow orders. This is a handicap that disables the leader's learning process and creates an echo chamber where individuals are unable to learn from the mistakes of failing to communicate, producing leaders with inflated leadership skills. The power and special privileges given to officers and commanders can be corrosive. The power attributed to the commander could mean that it is only their moral compass that matters. This is fomented by military justice that grants tremendous threat power, as commanders need only a preponderance of evidence, which doesn't necessarily mean quantity, as it is up to them to adjudicate who they choose to believe in investigations. And further, once an officer reaches general status, they're able to write a letter of reprimand, which is considered a career killer based solely on their own perception without any proof. Culturally, this divide between officers and enlisted can lead to incredible displays of veneration. A quote from the book Generation Kill about the Marine invasion in Iraq reads, "For all intents and purposes, he is God. In war, especially, his authority is absolute. And thus, upsetting them is akin to making a sin. The Navy has become so divided amongst its ranks that officers and senior enlisted leaders have their own special mess hall, which junior enlisted can't eat. Both Marine and Navy units had a higher risk of sexual harassment and assault than the Army. However, the Army also partakes on the idolization and glorification of commanders, especially in combat armed units. Further, the Army signals that committing crimes is okay so long as the perpetrator is highly decorated or of high rank. Officers in grade of major receive special considerations if they are the subjects of an investigation. Lastly, there is a permeating culture of stigma that surrounds mental health. The White Donkey by Maximilian Duarte does a great job of portraying it, and it can also be validated by a quick search online. All of this can lead to dehumanization, which is the process of denying human qualities to other individuals, making them seem less than humans. Zimbardo believes that this was a key action that had to be taken by the Nazis and the perpetrators of other atrocities, such as the rape of Rwanda, where dehumanization allowed them to believe their victims were inhumans, and thus it wasn't bad. In order to give these attributes to officers such as God or patron saint of chaos, the power balance must shift, and by doing so does the scale of humanity. Ethical lapses within the military appear to have increased exponentially. It seems that every week there is a new scandal to cover. While looking for causes to this epidemic, we find that there are certain internal factors such as PTSD, stress, and TBIs that might affect decision making, where externally we find that the military is not doing itself any favors, neither structurally nor culturally. Commanders, for example, have extremely stressful jobs, which compounds onto possible TBI and PTSD due to the stigma associated with mental health. A further lack of resources prevents individuals from seeking mental health early in their careers, which could be detrimental once these leaders reach the cusp of their career. When associated with external factors such as the dehumanization of junior enlisted and officers created by military culture and norms, the apparent limitless power conferred to them by rank and position, and the visible messaging that permeates the military, it creates nothing short but a recipe for disaster. While some of this is validated by multiple data points that show the prevalence of these internal and external factors, the answers displayed are still rooted in basic assumptions, and there is still a lot of research that still needs to be done in order to understand what exactly makes a leader susceptible to these ethical lapses. The first recommendation will be to increase mental health programs and awareness. For example, the creation of an educational and treatment program where individuals experiencing possible ethical dilemmas can be diagnosed and obtain help could be coupled with the already sexual harassment programs and intertwined to create a two-pronged approach to the problem. Further, this aligns with a zero tolerance policy, as individuals will have no excuse as they're provided with preemptive resources before they commit an offense. This can be seen as counterintuitive, but studies have shown that individuals that receive help concerning their sexual thoughts and behaviors are able to live safe, healthy, and non-offending lives, minimizing risk to the possible victims and safeguarding costs associated with leader training and education. The next recommendation is for the Army to take a deep look at the messaging in the military. While quick to remove the ad campaign featuring Jonathan Majors due to domestic violence, it still hasn't forbidden the Audie Murphy Club, a private non-profit entity, from being placed and taken with admiration in evaluations. While Audie Murphy is the highest decorated soldier in Army history, he also committed domestic violence and became an alcoholic. This will be one of many that will need a thorough investigation. Lastly, it will be the creation of an Army ethical code. This is necessary in order for all soldiers to have a single, unified, and a standardized moral compass that doesn't change from unit to unit or commander to commander.